Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap. In this one, we'll be talking about the RTX 3080 Ti. Thanks to MSI, the great leaker in the industry, accidentally leaking things once again. We'll be covering the dredge skeleton that is Atari, now pushing blockchain, as Atari does, jumping from one thing to the next. Intel and Nvidia have been taking shots at each other. We'll be talking about some of the industry trends, TSMC's power down, GPU warranties being silently shortened because of crypto mining, and a couple of other news topics. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly. Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut and Cryonaut thermal pastes are high-performing thermal interfaces for use on CPUs and GPUs. You can bring an old card back to peak performance by repasting it and doing preventative maintenance, and Thermal Grizzly's Hydronaut is ideal for water cooling and air cooling for new and old cards alike. Cryonaut paste is one of the top performing pastes for extreme overclocking with CPUs and GPUs and has been used in several world record scoring machines. Learn more at the link in the description below. First up, quick GN update. So the large Modmat original design is still in stock and shipping now. The medium Modmat original design still in stock and shipping now. We don't have, by the way, another medium in development right now. So those are available. The new large Modmat Volt that we announced a little over a week ago is probably, by the time this video goes up, sold out. We will have it on back order, but it's no longer actively in stock. So huge thank you to all of you who have purchased one. The new Modmat Volt was insanely popular and blew away our expectations. Really thought the inventory would have lasted a little longer, but it was everything. I mean, I had no more pennies to dig out of couch cushions for that one. So that was as much as we could have done, but we have more on the way and they're on back order on the store. Additionally, just a side note here, you might have seen our cheap cables content where we talk about the dangers of buying a woefully ill-equipped cable for your computing purposes. And as part of that video, we uploaded a behind-the-scenes video showing some of the power supply testing, or cable testing in this instance, that we're doing. Patrick Stone hosted that video. It's pretty cool and in-depth. And this week, we're also uploading a couple of Q&A questions series for our Patreon backers. So if you'd like to check that stuff out, go to patreon.com/gamersnexus. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of main channel content going up here as usual. Okay, first story is about MSI, the great leaker. If MSI existed in some ancient mythology, we do think it would be the revered MSI Great Leaker. You would probably sacrifice things in order to get secrets of some kind in this mythological writing of MSI's. It could be a magic card at that point. Legendary creature, dragon. Sacrifice one ethics token and scry 2. Use this ability anytime you could accidentally leak your supplier's plans for the entire next quarter. MSI shipped a box emblazoned with the name of the product within, as it often does. A crate of RTX 3080 Ti Ventus 12GB cards was spotted and posted by user LockLock on Facebook, and this confirms a rumor we'd been told by a board partner and that we previously published about the memory capacity. If you remember back to late 2020, the rumor was that there'd be a 20GB 3080 Ti in rapid succession to the 10GB RTX 3080, and that never came to be. So the 20GB SKU would have been a pure marketing battle against AMD's 16GB cards that it was pushing at the time, and it would have in some ways undercut the 3090 24GB model for the 3D artist crowd that just wants the memory. So the 12GB model is a more reasonable approach for a 3080 Ti. It's a bit more than a 3080, but it won't undercut the 3090 sales that Nvidia wants to push to 3D artists still, while also not offering a stupid amount of memory for the gaming audience, which will not get any benefit from 20GB versus 12, really. Now, you start talking 16, maybe there's something there in the future, but for now, 12 should be plenty. So a post by Hot Hardware also suggests a $1,000 price point for the RTX 3080 Ti. That would put it at $300 above the initial MSRP of the 3080. Current prices notwithstanding, and it'd be about $500 below the RTX 3090's price point and equal to the RX 6900 XT's price point. So that's the 3080 Ti news as we have it now. Don't look now, but the desecrated corpse of Atari that's been shambling about for the last few decades is about to make a comeback. It's getting duplicated. The executive necromancers atop Atari have decided that it's time to formally commit to Atari blockchain. That's right. You know that friend that's always jumping from one get-rich-quick scheme to the next, desperate for one of them to work and never quite committing to them? Well, that friend's Atari. That's how Atari operates now. It's hotels, and then it's blockchain, and then it's hotels, and then it's blockchain again, and then it's the VCS, where you have engineers who really want to make a good product and executives who want to make sure it's a scam. And then you end up, in the case of the VCS, with something that's accidentally a decent product. No thanks to the executive leadership at Atari. So the necromancers atop Atari's corporate ladder, not satisfied with how much of Atari's history and legacy has already been stained, have decided to create a new business unit solely focused on blockchain. Atari announced that in addition to some top of food chain leadership changes, it will also split its business into two separate divisions, Atari Gaming and Atari Blockchain. We're not sure which one the Atari Casino belongs under. It's a bit of A and a bit of B, but rest assured, Atari is working on its Atari Casino. Regarding the change in leadership, Atari announced that effective April 6, 2021, Wade J. Rosen will become CEO of the entire Atari group, while Frederick Chennai, former CEO of Atari, will focus on Atari blockchain and licensing. Atari Gaming will continue to extract and maybe exploit any meaningful value left in Atari's brands and IPs, for better or worse. Atari will also continue to develop free-to-play mobile games and expand upon its licensing model, both in sectors gaming and non-gaming. As for non-gaming, we arrive back at the Atari hotels and casinos. And as for gaming, well, that part's obvious. Atari claims to be committed to the Atari VCS still, and which is actually a lot better than we thought, and it's developing an entire ecosystem around it. It's trying to sustain it, apparently. Currently, that consists of a push for both third-party and first-party content. Atari Blockchain, as you may have guessed, will focus on all things blockchain and whatever other trends pop up. Actually, one of them is NFTs. They're talking about those too. So Atari's cringy Atari token is still on the roadmap. Additionally, Atari seems to be foaming at the mouth to get into NFTs, which it discussed in its news announcement. It seems that this division will specifically be focusing on NFTs, and once Atari is interested in something, the ride's probably already over, so we'll see how it goes. Earlier this year, we took a look at the embarrassingly delayed Atari VCS console and noted that, at least under the hood, the unit did in fact exceed our expectations. We also looked closer at the software and OS environment, as well as the gaming performance in some further coverage, if you'd like to check out the performance of the Atari VCS. And as stated, it really did come out to be a lot better than expected. It seemed like a mix of good engineers with whatever else is in Atari right now. Up next, GPU warranties. PC Gamer ran a story this past week about GPU warranties, catching that MSI and Gigabyte have both reduced warranty periods for GPUs in the current mining-laden market. Gigabyte's new $600 mining GPU has a warranty of just 90 days, which is completely absurd, although our understanding is that the EU and other regions with consumer-focused laws will require longer periods. We've typically seen warranties in the 2 to 3 year range for GPUs, for video cards, often at least 2-year parts warranties as listed by the manufacturers. It is feasible that there's a future where video card manufacturers could look into the usage of the card. They would do this by putting a chip on the board and logging, somewhat maybe ironically, potentially with blockchain, the usage of the card, of the GPU during its lifespan, how long it's been loaded at 100%, how frequently it cycles, power cycles, things like that. And this is something we actually spoke with a manufacturer about that we won't name a few years ago, where the company and at least one other at the time were interested in placing chips on the boards and using specifically blockchain, whatever that means, we're not exactly sure, but using the blockchain buzzword, which was still pretty new at the time, to track usage in a way that's similar to Carfax, so sort of seeing the history of the card. Whether that's exposed to the user or not, it never got that far, but it sounded like it was more of a should we deny their warranty or not type of thing, which does definitely get into a slippery slope type of argument where now you're starting to gate how a user uses the card. So if it's not explicitly clear what exactly the policies are, could it end up in a scenario where a kid who's playing games 40 hours a week with his GPU is not qualified for the warranty because that's too much or something. It's outside of reasonable usage or something like that. So definitely a slippery slope there. That did not proceed from what we can tell today, at least, for what that's worth. But that's where we are now. A warranty period of 90 days for a complicated electronics product with a lot of suppliers, a lot of room for error, is just completely unreasonable. You can literally buy plants, which are living things that are notoriously easy to kill. You can buy plants with a longer warranty than a video card. And it's probably your fault if the plant dies. It's insane. 90 days is the warranty for it. But anyway, it looked like some of them might have been as low as 2 months. Just keep an eye out when you're buying GPUs at this point, what the warranty period is. That it does matter. We don't normally talk about it a lot because they're all pretty standard at 2 to 3 years. But if you see one that's less than 6 months especially, it's probably a good idea to buy a different video card. Let's just do a quick recap of some videos we ran separately last week on Nvidia's GTC announcements and AMD's Ryzen 5000 series APU announcements, so the integrated graphics processor plus CPU choices that AMD's put up. This is something we covered in depth in 2 different videos, but to quickly recap it, Nvidia's GTC 2021 was all digital, unsurprisingly, and featured the traditional keynote format from Jensen Huang, who wanted to show off his immaculate kitchen in both real world and 3D. Nvidia's GTC highlights all of Nvidia's business segments, and this year Nvidia discussed graphics, AI, networking, data center, servers, and automotive. Dotted throughout the keynote were various product announcements with key emphasis on Nvidia's first data center CPU design. We had our hopes up that Jensen would pull out an Ampere-powered 64-core cake whisked from out of his oven, but alas, it was not meant to be. Maybe next year. Sans cake, what Nvidia did announce was Grace, its CPU for data center use. This is not an x86 consumer CPU, but it is an ARM-backed CPU for server, enterprise, and data center. Nvidia, as a reminder, does not technically own ARM yet. There's a bid out there. Both companies have agreed to it, but it's pending government regulation. So this was an Nvidia plus ARM partnership, not an Nvidia owns it all thing. Also announced was the Alps supercomputer, a new DGX SuperPod, the new Bluefield 3 DPU, and a slew of new GPUs aimed at data center and workstations, like the A5000 and 4000 line, as well as the A10 and A16 GPUs. For AMD, the main thing to look forward to is its line of Ryzen 5000G APUs. So these are Zen 3 CPUs with a Vega, not RDNA, to be very clear, a Vega IGP within. And these are aimed at addressing entry to mid-level systems. They are going to OEMs first. They're not OEM only, but they're going to OEMs first. And AMD said that the APUs will be available to the DIY market later this year. Someone in our comments asked, why would they do that? Which is a good question. So OEMs, as a reminder, have business-to-business relationships with AMD and Intel and NVIDIA. It is likely the case that those OEMs required a commitment and had a purchase order with AMD to ensure that they get a certain amount of them so that they can fulfill their own business arrangements, whether that's with schools, government offices, small businesses, whatever. So that's why it goes there first, because there's a limited amount of silicon available for AMD, and it sold it all to OEMs. So now those will be available to consumers as well, not just B2B, but that's how it worked out for now. The line consists of the 5700G, the 5700GE, both of which are Ryzen 7 CPUs following the traditional naming to core count nomenclature used. There's a 5600G in the Ryzen 5 line and GE. The GE models are 35 watts rather than the 45 to 65 range that you get otherwise. There's a 5300G and 5300GE, both of which are R3 CPUs, the first in this generation. And all of the parts are, again, Zen 3 for this group and built on the N7 7nm TSMC process. So that recaps you for those. We do have other videos for additional detail, but that should get you the basics. Following the summit held at the White House regarding the global chip shortage, Fortune was able to talk with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger about a few different things. The overall interview is short, but it's worth a read. It's in our show notes document if you want the source. And the topics included the U.S. government's proposed $50 billion plan to bolster the U.S. semiconductor industry, as well as a discussion on the current state of U.S.-based silicon manufacturing. Gelsinger also offered a bit of commentary on NVIDIA's product announcements at GTC 2021, with a particular emphasis on NVIDIA's Grace CPU. This is, again, aimed at data center, where Intel is pretty heavily embedded. Fortune inquired about Gelsinger's thoughts on Intel's competitive position with NVIDIA, as well as accelerating the use of AI within CPUs. Gelsinger told Fortune, quote, "We announced our Ice Lake last week with an extraordinarily positive response. And in Ice Lake, we have extraordinary expansions in the AI capabilities. NVIDIA is responding to us. It's not us responding to them. Clearly, this idea of CPUs that are AI enhanced is the domain where Intel is a dramatic leader." See, kids, if you like to go on YouTube videos and post first, as soon as a video goes live to try and get the first comment, you too can one day be the CEO of a $200+ billion market cap company. We did it first. Nvidia is responding to it's literally the embodiment of first in the comment section, except it's that embodiment gets paid millions upon millions of dollars every year. All that said, there's a bit of a point there. And Gelsinger doubled down, reminding us that Intel acquired Habana Labs, which is a silicon designer specializing in AI, back in 2019, with the express intent of accelerating AI in the data center. Not that Nvidia hasn't been doing things since then, of course. Intel also announced a massive partnership with AWS last year with the goal of accelerating deep learning, AI, and HPC and cloud computing. Towards the end of the interview, Gelsinger said, quote, "So clearly, I'd say the idea of CPUs is Intel's provenance. We're building AI into that, and we expect this to be an area where we are on the offense, not the defense, going forward." I don't know, Mr. Gelsinger. That sounds a little defensive. But we understand. Next story is also Intel, but it's about automotive. So over the last few weeks, Intel has announced a number of moves that are aimed at getting Intel back on track. A number of them seem to be good, like personnel changes, for example, getting Pat Gelsinger in there as CEO. One of the most critical changes, though, that Intel announced was the creation of Intel Foundry Services, or IFS. This is where Intel will be manufacturing silicon for external customers, like Sci-Fi, for example. We've noted previously that Intel's IFS could be a watershed moment for the company, and it's in a unique position relative to other foundries because it has access to Intel's IP. Feasibly, Intel could also license its existing catalog of x86 IP. This puts Intel in a position where it can not only leverage the foundry model, but it could also emulate some degree of ARM's licensing model success. It's obviously a bit early to know where exactly Intel is going to steer IFS, but it's not hard to imagine the possibilities with IFS. That said, Intel recently told Reuters that it's held discussions on building specialized silicon for the automotive industry. Additionally, Intel has expressed interest in stepping in to try and mitigate some of the symptoms caused by the semiconductor shortage, which the automotive industry has been feeling acutely. Gelsinger told Reuters, quote, "We're hoping that some of these things can be alleviated, not requiring a 3 or 4 year factory build, but maybe 6 months of new products being certified on some of our existing processes. We've begun those engagements already with some key component suppliers." Automotive silicon makes sense for Intel. Intel's IFS needs customers, and the automotive industry needs another source for its silicon needs, and they don't need to be gaming class CPUs. They need to go in cars, so that's a different focus. It's things like AI, if they're autonomous, or just controlling everything else in a car if they're not. Moreover, as Intel has more granular control over its supply chains and the logistics, it hasn't been affected to the same degree as others have in regards to component shortages, such as substrates. Gelsinger told Reuters that it's discussing the matter with a number of companies that design automotive silicon, and it hopes to produce chips within 6 to 9 months. Up next, Epic Games finds itself in our news segments once again, this time because of its battle with Steam. We've been talking about its battle with Apple, the legal battle that is, over the last couple of months on and off, but this one comes back to Valve. So Epic, as one would expect, has been investing obscene amounts of money into its Epic Games store to try and compete with Valve. This is going to be a money-losing endeavor initially, and it certainly has been. It's been a big money-losing endeavor. Epic Games has implemented a number of somewhat atypical business practices for its online store, all while unabashedly pointing a critical finger at Steam. Such practices include taking a 12% revenue cut on third-party games distributed through Epic Games Store. Steam and some of its competitors have historically been closer to 30%. Epic's also waiving the 5% royalty fee for Unreal Engine for monetized games until a game accrues $1 million in revenue, and it's doing advanced payouts of its minimum guarantees. On top of trying to crack Steam's grip on PC gaming, Epic is also deeply entangled in a bitter lawsuit with Apple over its iOS store. That's, again, an entirely different story that we've discussed before, but the ongoing lawsuit has produced no shortage of financial filings from both companies. It's in these filings from the battle with Apple where the numbers relating to Steam and Valve emerge. So according to court documents and testimonies, Epic has shown a year-over-year loss for the Epic Games Store since its inception in 2018. Again, not wholly unsurprising given what Epic's going up against, and it is probably the company to lose money in this way. For 2019, Epic noted a $181 million loss that increased in 2020 to $273 million, and it has a projected loss of $139 million, certainly much better, for 2021. Now, that's for the store. That's not for all of Epic, which has more money than MSI, the great leaker, mythical god from some former mythology. So Epic is at this point, according to Apple's math, spending about $444 million on minimum guarantees for just 2020 alone. And according to Epic's own year in review for the Epic Games Store, users spent a reported $700 million on the platform in 2020, but only $265 million of that figure represented third-party game sales. In that same report, Epic also noted that there were over 749 million copies of free games claimed in 2020. Epic maintains that its 12% cut has allowed it to cover costs of distribution, as well as inject more investments into the store. Also, Epic claims that at some point, that revenue cut will more than sustain the storefront. It seems most of Epic's losses here are coming from advanced payouts to developers and the cost of securing free games. Epic has spent a lot of money in securing developers and timed exclusives for the Epic Games Store. And for an example here, it's well known at this point that Epic paid more than $10 million in upfront payments for the exclusive distribution of Control. For any other company trying to take on Steam, this wouldn't be feasible or sustainable. Epic, however, can do it. Epic's making so much money from Fortnite and all the Fortnite merchandising and licensing that certainly it can keep dumping money into the store until it forces it to work or until it just doesn't make sense to do anymore. But they've got the money to put in, put it that way. Another reason Epic has the money to put in is because it just had a fundraising round. So it had a round of funding for $1 billion in new investments, and Sony alone was $200 million, for which Epic put some of Sony's characters into Fortnite. Nvidia had some disheartening, if unsurprising, comments on GPU supply issues permeating the market. The comments were brief and came at the annual Investor Day, which coincided with the kickoff of GTC 2021. Nvidia CFO Gallick addressed investors and outlined how Nvidia's Q1 22 revenue is tracking above its previous outlook. And as a note, fiscal years are weird, and Nvidia makes use of those. So this is actually talking about the current year. Nvidia had previously projected its Q2 fiscal revenue of $5.3 billion, plus or minus 2%. According to Nvidia, the company is on track to punch above that, thanks to strong demand from all business sectors. Regarding supply constraints, Nvidia doesn't expect much to change this year. Quote, overall demand remains very strong and continues to exceed supply while our channel inventories remain quite lean. We expect demand to continue to exceed supply for much of this year. We believe that we'll have sufficient supply to support sequential growth beyond Q1. If the GPU smuggling we talked about last week wasn't enough, it seems now consumers also have to deal with scams. Well, they always had to, but now it's getting worse. So there's some reports that are warning about scammers who are posing as AMD China or XFX and sending out fake letters claiming a recall for the RX 580. The bogus recall lists PCB and manufacturing defects as the reason for the recall, and it offers users, wait for it, a GTX 1050 Ti or a 1063 Gigabyte as a replacement for trading in the RX 580 to XFX, who is AMD exclusive or AMD official. Of course, AMD and XFX both had something to say about this. AMD China, the actual AMD China, not the fake scammer one, released an official statement via Weibo, and XFX put up a statement on Bilibili. So both of these are popular social media platforms. Bilibili is kind of like a YouTube equivalent. So the statements warn users to disregard any letters or emails claiming a recall and continue operating as normally. Also in mining news, as one of the first officially official NVIDIA CMP30HX SKUs, we've seen some SKUs pop up overseas, and not long ago we saw leaked images of Gigabyte's CMP30HX card. Now Gigabyte has made the 30HX D66G card official, and according for listings found by none other than momomo_US, they could go for $600 to $700 plus. On the surface, the D66G doesn't appear to be drastically different from Gigabyte's GeForce 1660 Super gaming SKU, except it lacks display outputs and it has a 3-month warranty window. It's still using TU116, it's using similar components, and it's using the WindForce cooler. Gigabyte is the first board partner we've seen officially list an NVIDIA CMP SKU, and we expect more vendors to follow suit before too long. Pricing remains a big question mark, and whether these low-end CMP SKUs are ever sold via retail channels as opposed to direct B2B sales remains to be seen at this point. They won't detract from miners going after gaming GPUs, though, because those have the most resale value. And finally, TSMC's power outage. Reuters and Digitimes reported that TSMC suffered a power outage at one of its facilities, specifically Fab 14A P7, which is also Elon Musk's next kid's name. According to reports, the power outage seemed to be brief and the fab was able to run on generator power for a time. However, TSMC said it still has a disruption in production, having to pause manufacturing on older process nodes as a result. Digitimes noted that the disruption impacted up to 40,000 wafers and could cost TSMC as much as $35 million, all told. At the time of writing, TSMC is still assessing the impact of the outage, and we're sure the company will release a statement once it's content with its findings. The outage was caused by an underground transmission line getting cut during some surrounding construction work. Very expensive mistake in this instance. TSMC's Fab 14 is one of the company's 8 gigafabs producing 12-inch wafers, and the fab mostly deals with process nodes between 40 and 90 nanometers. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to get that behind-the-scenes video we talked about earlier, or store.gamersnexus.net to grab the mod mats, and subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.